those rent numbers are your key to the deal. If you can't hit those rent numbers, again, it could fluctuate up and down. But if you can't hit those rent numbers on a consistent basis, your deal is going to look very different than what you underwrote it.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Gentle Art of Crushing It show, where we focus on learning and sharing with our listeners all there is to know about how to create success in our lives. This show stands on the shoulders of giants. Our mission is to empower and inspire our listeners to create the life of their dreams whilst having a blast in the process. Let's celebrate life together. Welcome to the show.
All right, welcome back to the Gentle Art of Crushing It podcast, Passive Investing Edition. My name's Randy Smith, and I'll be your host today. And I'm really excited. We've got a great guest here today, Daniel Lichtman. He is the Director of Acquisitions for Lightwater Capital. They have up almost about 3,000 units under management, and just really excited to talk to you, Daniel. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm glad we finally were able to make it.
We did have some scheduling difficulties there. I think we both ended up having to reschedule at one point. So yeah, thanks for your persistence and patience on that. But
sure. Pleasure.
Well, why don't we jump right into it? Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you found yourself here in a Director of Acquisitions position with a great organization?
Sure. My name is Daniel Lichtman. I grew up in Chicago. Went to school in New York. My family, my father's side is from New York, so I always had that New York side to me. People get a little confused when I tell them from Chicago because I'm so fast-paced and I speak pretty fast.
Sure.
So I do get a little confused, but I do like to throw in that I grew up in a little more of out-of-town Chicago, a little slower pace, even though I'm a lot more fast-paced than that. Went to high school and post-high school in New York, studied in Jerusalem, Israel for 2 years. Wow. Came back to where I live now in the Lakewood, New Jersey area, and actually studied in the Lakewood yeshiva called BMG. It's a large institute with over 7,000 or 8,000 individuals. Wow. A lot of them do go to become attorneys, real estate entrepreneurs, healthcare entrepreneurs, a lot of different businesses. And Lakewood is definitely booming where my office is located now. In 2015, I started at a distressed debt fund. I was before that I was working in an operations manager position. Doing some sales work. Someone approached me. My boss, from that point, reached out to me and said, "Hey, you'd be great at acquisitions." I didn't know what that meant. I know what acquisitions were. I tried Googling it. Didn't really get the results that I was looking for. So I decided to try it. I started going in on Sundays and then eventually full-time, calling brokers and reaching out. So it was more of a distressed debt, reaching out to REO brokers, reaching out to banks, lenders, servicers, we bought tax liens, we bought notes, we bought REOs, more on the smaller single-family side. But we did have some smaller multifamily. I'm talking about 20 to 30 unit properties in New Jersey that I was very hands-on. Twice a week, I was on site, speaking to the residents, getting things done, where I really learned from the ground up. And at the same time, I would be going to conferences more on the distress side, but always had an inkling and a liking for the multifamily space. And I always said, like you hear on a lot of podcasts, I said, if we could do this on a single-family space, how much more so on a multifamily space? So I was there for about 4.5 years. At one point, I decided towards the end of 2019, I actually took a underwriting course with the Riverside Abstract. They have an underwriting course that was great. It was a 4-week program. Really taught me everything I know in terms of, and its paid ROI has been tremendous.
Sure.
Hundreds and hundreds times of the cost of the program for sure. I started, learning how to underwrite. Beginning of 2020, I got to a point where I decided I wanted to move on. I told my then boss, saying, I'm going to look for a new opportunity. And I left. It was the end of January. It was right before COVID.
Okay.
Took me. It wasn't the best time to leave, but God has His plans. I decided to move on.
Yeah.
The next few months, because of COVID, people were at a standstill. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know who knows what would happen. Are people still going to buy? What's going to happen to all real estate? So a lot of people were on a pause. So the next few months, I kind of took the time to reach out to many owners and operators and trying to see what I could do to put together buyers and sellers. At the same time, anytime somebody sent me a deal to review, I would underwrite it. So I was starting to learn how to really underwrite and utilize that knowledge. Mm-hmm. And then in May of 2020, I got hired by a local company in Lakewood called REO Legacy Group, where I was there for about 1.5 years. They focused on heavier value add off-market multifamily deals. While I was there, I sourced completely off-market 2 deals. One of them in Shreveport, Louisiana, from a local New York owner that was completely mismanaging it. It was 50 to 60% occupied. Wow. There was There was a building right across the street from the leasing office that had a gaping hole with a tree for about 2 years, and that was how they tried leasing it. They didn't have such success.
Sure.
So we took over that property and turned it around. And then, from what I hear, it's doing really well. And at the same time, we were focused on the St. Louis, Missouri market. And we can get into that later. I had a very interesting off-market deal there in St. Louis, the site of the Michael Brown shooting. We purchased that property direct from the owner, rebranded it, turned it around. So that was my getting my feet wet in the multifamily space. So I underwrote probably 150 deals. We ended up closing on 2 deals, had a couple under contract that fell out, really got involved in the asset management as well. That was about a year and a half. And then in the meantime, I would go to different networking events, bigger events, smaller events. Again, this company, Riverside, hosted a small event in New Jersey. I decided, you know what, $100, I'm going to do it. It's from me. I'm investing in myself. It's not for my company. I just wanted to see what I could do to build out my network.
Sure.
I went there. I met with my current employee. His name is Mayor, and he was actually pitching a deal. It was a deal in Atlanta that we currently own and operate. It was a newer construction. I would say not newer, but 90s vintage. So one of the newer of our portfolio. And he was pitching it to investors as if he was looking for investors, although at that point he was fully subscribed. And we hit it off and we chatted and we kept in touch. Fast forward about nine months later, I'd reached out to him to see if he's looking for anybody. He wasn't. He followed up with me a month later. Hey, I have an opportunity. My guy just told me he's leaving. If you're interested, let's go. I started in January of 2022.
Okay.
So January 2022 until present, so about a year and a half, I've been in Lightwater Capital. Thank God, since I've started, we've done about 160 million between close to 9 or 10 properties that we've closed on since I've started, primarily in Indiana and Georgia, Atlanta, Indianapolis, and Savannah. We have a one-off, so that's how I really got into it. And my first year here at Lightwater Capital, I underwrote 275 deals, and we closed on about 6 deals. So thank God, I've definitely come to the major leagues here. So that's how I got into the multifamily space.
Are you interested in real estate investing but don't know where to get started or think you don't have the time or money? Are you stuck in your W-2 because the golden handcuffs make it hard to walk away? If this sounds like you, check out impactequity.net and schedule some time to talk with the founder, Randy Smith. Randy went from massive income to leaving his W-2 through passive income, and he can help you do the same. www.impactequity.net.
Well, you covered a lot of ground. You weren't joking when you said that your personality fits well with New York. So, yeah, a lot to unpack there. So a couple of things. One, you mentioned that you did a Riverside underwriting course. It sounds like years ago. Tell me about that a little bit. I'm not familiar with Riverside.
Sure.
I've looked at some of these underwriting courses myself. I've done a couple of those. I'm curious, what is that, and
Sure.
What did that give you?
Sure. So Riverside is one of the I'm not here to pitch them, but one of the title companies based in the New York, New Jersey area.
Got it.
So they do title work similar to Madison Title and some other, large title companies. One of the things they do offer is they have networking events every few months, different events that are very interesting that cover different topics. They also have an underwriting course given by one of their guys named Mark Phelps. And what he does is he breaks down, he's always developing his model. So he sits down once a week for 4 weeks and goes through the model. He did one of the classes he did a sample deal. He had another guy that was actually very focused in Atlanta who knew the market in and out. They came and for half hour just went through the different nuances of the Atlanta market. So it's actually really interesting just to learn how to understand a market. And he also provided, videos and resources. So it really helped me just to understand what it means to underwrite a deal, because I never really understood and knew how to do that. Even though I was doing acquisitions, my role was more just calling, reaching out, and bringing in the properties and then handing it off to someone else to analyze it. Now I finally understood how to actually do it myself on the multifamily space. So that's kind of what Riverside did for me and really helped me. And I would highly encourage it because they do it, every so often in person, also remotely, as via Zoom, and it's an excellent course.
So if my math serves me right here, I think you mentioned you did like 150 deals that you underwrote with the prior employer and then 275 on this one. So you're upwards of 425, 450 deals that you've underwritten over the last handful of years. And again, the audience here is primarily new or newer passive investors. Can you talk about what are the types of things that passive investors should be looking at when they're looking at deals from an underwriting standpoint, or at least checking on assumptions of the underwriting? What's a good thing for kind of the newer folks to take a look at?
Sure. So every market's different, but it's always important to see the assumptions,
Okay.
especially in today's market. But even before the debt markets changed, there were people that had underwritten maybe 8-10% plus of market rent growth, which is obviously, which they may have been achieving it, but now that the market's shifted, they're kind of less holding the bag. So it's always important to see that that the assumptions that people are making on their income growth is within line with the market and not being too aggressive. You always want to make sure that they have they have enough occupancy and they have enough vacancy loss, I should say, and any concessions or delinquency, you want to make sure that they have budgeted for that as well. Because even if the property is doing well as a T12 on a 12-month basis before you bought it, or if you're going to be renovating the units or going through and taking let's say a property that's averaging $800 and saying, I'm going to get it up to $1,200 or $1,300, you're going to have a higher vacancy loss. You're going to have a higher delinquency potentially of people that can't afford that or just, going to lag behind. So it's always important to see that people have that budgeted. You want to make sure they have their expense assumptions. People that do maybe $2,500 to $3,000, or I should say 25% to 30% of expenses. You want to make sure that they have at least 40 to 50%. You want to see that. Okay. You want to check out their insurance assumptions, especially in today's market. Insurance numbers can be crazy. I spoke to somebody today about a deal in Florida, and he recommended underwrite it at least $2,000 a unit. Someone else told me maybe $1,500. If you see somebody that's $500-600 a unit, maybe those are the numbers a year or two ago. Those are not the numbers in today's market. So you want to always look at that. You want to know what happens to the taxes. You want to see the taxes. Do the taxes change? Part of what we like about our Indiana is that the taxes don't necessarily change right away. They do, maybe they'll be assessed at a later date. So you have to know if there's any assumptions or any increase in taxes, because sometimes you'll see a deal come across your plate that looks very interesting and it looks very lucrative, but they didn't assume any change in taxes. And then they get hit hard with a new tax bill, and the whole deal kind of takes. So you want to make sure that they have those assumptions and that they're being conservative. I think conservative is also a very important key, especially in every market, but especially in today's market, where not to assume crazy increases, not to assume lower than usual, lower than normal expenses. And you also want to make sure that they're budgeted properly. If they're planning on doing a CapEx project, but they only have a few $1,000s per unit, or their total CapEx is, less than a few thousand per unit, something is likely not correct if they're really going to be pushing, especially on the value add plan. So that's something very important in all those assumptions to look at to make sure that they have the right budgets and that they have the conservative assumption.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for walking through that. And I think you nailed it. You hit every one of the metrics that I look at from an assumption standpoint when I'm looking at a deal. And those are things that a lot of people don't think about. If you're doing a Class C value add and you're planning on renovating 100% of the units, your vacancy loss is going to be significantly higher because there is a turn time that increases significantly when you're renovating those units. So
right.
I like that you brought the attention to that. Expense assumptions, that classic 40 to 50%, insurance and taxes. We're hearing so much about that. I've not heard 2,000. I've heard of deals jumping from like 5 to 1,000 or 1,200, but never up into the 2,000. Again, I don't look at Florida opportunities all that often, so that could be a big function of that. But really, really important stuff to consider. Now, I'm curious, when you're looking at deals, or when passive investors are looking at deals, should they go one step further and really dig into the model that the operators are using to make sure calculations are occurring correctly, or that there's not errors? Or what are your thoughts about that? I hear sometimes where you find errors in people's tools and models that they're using, and it changes the results dramatically when those are uncovered. What are your thoughts about that?
So a big factor is the trust factor. I would always recommend, looking into it, going into it a little bit more than just, taking their word for it. But at the same time, it's very important to know the sponsor and who the operator is. If this sponsor has a track record of doing deals, of cycling through the deals full cycle, either refinancing or selling, and giving their investors a return, and they have those conservative assumptions, then I feel like you could be a little bit less. You don't have to be as it's not as crucial to go take a deep dive. But if it's the first time you're hearing of somebody, or it's just a random, somebody reaches out on LinkedIn or sends you a webinar, or send you some information, it's always important to feel to ask. And we always do that. We send, besides the OM, we send them the actual underwriting model that they could play with. Have any questions? We're an open book. We're transparent. We'll answer any
Love it.
questions you like. Definitely, they say trust but verify.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And what about cap rates? Or exit cap rates compared to entry cap rates? Do you have a general rule of thumb that you like to use with your model when underwriting?
So our rule of thumb is a little bit different, maybe a little less conventional than a lot of other people. Most people assume if they're entering at a 6 cap and they do a certain amount of basis points above that for the exit. For us, because we take deals and we kind of turn them around, even though we're not playing the game of compressing the cap rates, we do look at it, hey, when the rates do come down, where do we think rates should be at? So, for example, if we're buying a 6 cap, we may assume a 5.5 exit cap because of the fact that we know where the market was a year ago and we're planning on holding it for the next 3 to 5 years. We always plan it to exit at a certain point. Again, if rates don't go down at all, that's obviously a question, and we don't have a crystal ball. But we're on the assumption that within the next 24 to 36 months, rates should start to plateau and should start to come down. But we're comfortable saying, you know what, even though we're getting it at a great basis now, we're getting it north of a 6 cap. We're typically going to underwrite about a 5.5 exit cap. Some groups like to say that, oh, that's being too aggressive. But again, that's just the way we've seen the markets and we've seen the cycles. That even that we're at a point where we're hoping to be a buy low and a sell high, and but obviously we need every deal. Every deal we're looking at now, even if let's say we're buying at a 6 cap, we're building it out to north of the 8 cap, which means that all in all expenses, when it comes down to my year 5 exit, it's going to be at least an 8 cap. That even if rates are so high where I have to sell it at a 7 cap, which has been unheard of in the last 10 years or so. Mm-hmm. But even if that would be the case, we still would be able to exit and get our investors whole and make some money. We may not make as much money as we projected, but we always give ourselves that level of saying, even if we don't hit that exit cap and the exit cap is higher, and that's something our investors can stress test because they have access to the model. So they could easily play around with it and say, okay, what happens if I exit a 6 cap? What happens if I exit a 6.5 or a 7 cap? Mm-hmm. And they could see where the returns are. And then they could see, hey, am I still comfortable investing in this deal at an exit of a 7 cap? Chances are you will still be because of the way we're building it out in our value add plan.
Love it. And just the fact that you are comfortable talking to it to that level, I think gives a lot of confidence probably to your investors. And especially the fact that you give them the tool to play with them as well, where you can allow them to put their own assumptions into your model with the information that you have. I think that's extremely powerful. That's fantastic. Not all operators will share their model, I find. So I think that's a great thing that you do that. Now, another thing that comes into this is you mentioned rent increases and even just like comps. When you're looking at comps in an area, I'm curious, what is your process for figuring out comps? And then also on the back end, your rent increases as you're going out 2, 3, 5 years. How do you do that?
So I'm probably on every single property's prospect list because I call all the properties in the area similar vintage. If I'm looking at a 1970s property, so I'm gonna look at the vintage of like 70s, 80s, maybe 90s. I don't usually go newer than that because I want to make sure it's apples to apples. The same trust but verify applies over here. I'm not going to just rely on maybe CoStar or apartments.com. I'm not going to just rely on even their website. I try not to rely on that as well. I try to actually physically call the properties, tell them, sometimes they figure it out, depends on the property manager, and sometimes they get a little annoyed, sometimes they're happy to provide me the information, but I usually say, hey, I'm looking to rent a renovated 1 and 2 bedroom, what's the square footage, because they have different floor plans, so I want to find somebody that's a similar model, similar type. I like to hear what kind of amenities they have, because I want to make sure that, hey, if I'm looking at a property maybe that doesn't have a pool and the other property has a pool, maybe that's something that would warrant, a higher rent. So I always like to compare apples to apples. Once I have that all in my model, then we'll actually go tour the property. We'll tour at least 2 or 3 of the comps as well to make sure that we can hit those rents. But that's a crucial part of our underwriting, is knowing that we could hit those rents. And that rent comp tab is very important in our model to say, hey, we have 3, 4, maybe more rent comps that support if we could put in X amount of money, and that changes every deal depending on the property and depending on the level of finishes. If we put in X amount of money, we expect to hit a certain amount of extra income for it. I call all the comps. I speak to them. I was telling one of my property managers the other day that I could tell the difference between a great property manager or leasing agent and a decent one. A great one doesn't let me off the phone and keeps asking me, "What's your number? Can I call you back?" And I'm like, I'm David. I'm not really looking for an apartment. They usually get me at that point. Versus one that's when I say I'm not, okay, I'll get back to you. Okay, thank you, and they hang up. They don't have that level of being able to pull you in. So I get that, and I see that from the day-to-day of calling them. But yeah, I definitely call them, and I'm looking for at least 3 to 4 comps within a 2 to 3 mile radius. I don't like to go too far, because once you go a little too far, then it could be a different neighborhood, different demographics.
And I'm curious, so are you secretly shopping for property managers as well when you're doing all of those calls, or no?
I'm always, well, actually one time someone called me so many times and said, "I'm just curious to know what CRM are you using?" And they gave me the name of it. I actually had a call with that CRM, because I was so curious. Like they're so on top of their game. It was so interesting to me that, like, to hear the difference. You really see the difference when you're calling. Some property managers are more aggressive, some of them less. So it's always, I wouldn't say I'm shopping for managers, but I always like to take that and see what I could do to help my managers improve and help them,
absolutely
really succeed and crush it.
Yeah, I mean, the gold is in the follow-up for sure. So it sounds like some of those folks have figured that out. So very good. Well, let's see here. So yeah, thank you for kind of walking through that. I think that was a great explanation. I think it brings a ton of value to the listeners as well, to know kind of the quality and the amounts and just the amount of effort and energy that goes into getting those. It's not just, you look online, you go to apartments.com and you find what, a couple of them that look similar, kind of in a radius. Like there's a science to this, there's a process, and there's a ton of energy and effort that go into that, because those inputs have such a huge impact on what the overall returns will be. So if you're running into operators that aren't doing that level of activity to make sure they're getting the right comps, even just simply something as simple as the comps, that can have a dramatic difference on the way that this business plan plays out. So yeah, thank you for walking through that.
Yeah, and Randy, I just want to point out, I meant to say this before, but rent comps is another thing that passive investors should definitely look at. They're welcome to call the comps. They can look it up. They can call them and trust it and see for themselves. Sometimes I will say that the rent does change because they're on daily pricing. So maybe one number in the model and a different number depending on availability. One time I actually, a few months ago, someone had sent me a deal to see if we were interested in partnering and JVing with them and partnering with them on the deal. And I started looking at it and I said no right away. And the reason why I said no is because I looked at their rent comps, and the rent comps was for a different state from a different deal, which they never updated it. So I said, if they're this sloppy, then I don't think I can trust it. And then I looked further and I saw their CapEx, and their CapEx was miscalculating. I said, you know what, that was a red flag for me. And that's something that passive investors should definitely be looking at. Make sure you have good comps, several comps within similar vintage, within the similar area. You don't want to see a comp that's 10 miles away or 30 years newer than the property, or much more amenitized. You want to make sure that it's very similar and apples to apples, so that if they say that they can get this $200-$300, whatever it is, rent bump, and they have what to prove it, you could feel comfortable with it and be comfortable with that as well.
Love it. Yeah, great. Hey, how they do anything is how they do everything is a great saying that I love to follow by. So, well, let's shift if we can, because I know asset management is kind of near and dear to you. You spend a lot of time in the asset management space. Let's talk about that process, and what are some things that you and your organization are doing to drive value and make sure that you're executing on the business plans that you present in the performance.
Sure. So, we've always been on top of our asset management. We have third-party management in our Indiana and Georgia properties, but we're very, hands-on asset managers. The last few months, since March, I've flown to Atlanta 15 times. I go there once a week. I'm on a plane. I go in and out. I go to several properties. My managers know already that when I come that, I'm going to ask certain questions. I'm going to walk, knock on some units, knock on some doors, speak to them, see how things are doing. I'm going to make notes of things to make sure that the property is performing at its best. I'm going to check out the vacancies to see what I can do to move them along and move them a little quicker. And we're always very open, just the same way we communicate when it comes to our deals and our acquisitions and our investor relations. We're very open with our management company and our vendors and the people we work on the asset management level of, hey, what can we do to improve? We have a weekly call with the managers and the management company, I should say, and we discuss it. Hey, is there anything? How are we doing with the pricing? Do we need to shift the rent? Do we need to come down $25? Could we go up $25? We're always looking. We don't do daily pricing, so we're always looking where we could be at in our rent. If we see that we have a little bit more, vacancies, we're going to come down a bit until we get higher. We're always looking for creative ways to give back to the community. We're always doing different things of that nature. One of the things we started doing recently, we started looking at all our laundry rooms. A lot of the properties have laundry rooms. We noticed that two of them actually in Indiana didn't have any contracts. It was just the previous owner had bought the machines. And our regional manager reached out to say, hey, most of the machines don't work and it's interesting. We have a 96 unit property that was making more laundry income than our 348 unit property. And because most of the machines were down, so reached out to a local company here in New Jersey that somebody recommended. Instead of a revenue share, he was actually able to offer a lease or finance option where we're leasing the machines for a certain amount per month. And any revenue above that with the card readers, any revenue above that is pure profit to the property. And our regional was all on board. He was so excited. He had a few calls with them to discuss it. It's literally going to look like a laundromat. We're having like these semi-professional machines, beautiful, nice, brand new machines. We're getting rid of the old ones because we didn't even have a contract on it. So that's just one way of being creative instead of just doing things status quo, saying, hey, what can we do to improve that income? We're always looking for ways to do things like, for example, we partnered with a company called Jetty in our Atlanta properties. And what Jetty does is, and I did extensive research on the different security deposit alternatives, is that they offer, instead of the resident have to come up with a month or two of security deposit up front, a lot of these workforce housing residents, every penny counts when it comes to move-in. They're living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe they could pay the rent, but they don't have that extra $1,000, $1,500 to move in. So I did a lot of research and I said, okay, especially in our Atlanta properties, let's work to bring down that cost as much as possible. We're still going to keep our qualifications. They have to qualify as a resident, like if they could afford the rent, but let's do something where they pay a small amount per month and we'll be covered. We'll have more coverage than we would have maybe if we're just taking a flat, smaller fee. And this way it's a win-win. The resident gets to move in as a zero deposit. We could advertise it that we're a zero deposit community. So it's an amenity and something that the residents love, as well as we have coverage that if the resident moves out or there's damages or any past due rent, we have a certain amount of coverage. So that's just one small example besides the laundry income. So we're always looking every month. We look at our financials with a fine tooth comb, always looking to see, what's happening, making sure that our utilities are within line. We've used a company based in Ohio called NOI Enhancement that does all our low flow toilets, and they've been great. They provide us before we even buy the property with a proposal, exactly what the cost is going to be and approximately how much savings we're going to have. We did it in a portfolio of 628 units in Indianapolis that we bought about a year ago. We did it first quarter after we purchased it. The first quarter we did this low flow toilets. I think it was about $200,000 or $300,000 cost that we put into our CapEx budget beforehand. They did it in about 5 or 6 weeks, switched out every single toilet to low flow. So instead of it being a 1.6 gallon plus, we did it now it's only 0.8. So it automatically half of the usage. They put in low flow shower heads. They put in low flow aerators throughout the complete property completely. So within the first quarter, we were done with that. Our savings, we assumed it would be about 30%. Our savings were 50 to 60%. So that was a tremendous savings. So we're always looking for ways to improve on our current deals, on our new deals. We're always looking at what we could do. If there's no cable contract, for example, we'll lock in a cable contract, which is, for the listeners, if they're not familiar, if you have a 100-unit property that doesn't have an exclusive cable contract, you could sign up with a cable contract with a company, and they usually give you a per unit fee up front, which is just extra income, which doesn't hurt the bottom line. It's not extra expense. It's something the residents are fine with. They just using an exclusive company, and there's small things that make a huge difference. I want to point out one thing that we did with this one property, the one I mentioned before. It's called Hidden Creek. It's 116 units in Georgia. They have garages, and for a while the garages were not being used, and there was other issues with there's been storage. So we identified that as a source of revenue, and the source of revenue said, hey, we have about 16 garages, and we can get $75 to $100 per month. It may not seem like a lot of money, but that extra $9,000 a year approximately, if you divide it by a 6 cap, it's about $150,000. My math might be a little off. Sure. It's about $150,000 of extra income. And maybe some of the listeners don't know how that works, but typically with a cap rate evaluation, the beauty of real estate, especially multifamily, is that you can kind of create your own destiny. You could really crush it, so to speak, where you
Yeah.
can go improve your income, bring your expenses down, have your NOI increase, and that pushes the value of the property. It's not like a single family home, which dictates by the neighborhood and the market. If a home you bought it for 300,000, the market went up 100,000, it's 400,000. Your house can be worth 400,000 unless you made it into the Taj Mahal. It's not going to go up in value that much.
Right.
Whereas in multifamily, if you bring down your expenses and you improve your operational, where you improve your income, any little bit, those few dollars that you change and you add, really improves the value of increases the value of the property, which allows you to sell it or even refinance it and give back the LP equity to your investors.
Yep.
And it's just a tremendous win. So that's something that I always enjoy in the asset management, is always honing in and saying, hey, where could we do better? Maybe we could do better with a different trash company. Maybe we should bring down our expenses. Why is the utilities high? Let's look into it and try to really figure out and find it and tackle it. And that's something that I really enjoy doing very much in our day-to-day operation.
I love it. I love it. And obviously, yeah, you are an amazing team member to have on this organization. You can hear just by the way that you're talking about these different areas that you're passionate about this, you're driving the value. And it's important for passive investors to see this type of energy, because that's what you need in an asset manager. I had a guy share with me that in multifamily, considering the way that these things are priced, it's the only place in the world where you can take a $50 can of paint, put a number on 10 different parking spots and charge $50 a month. And you have literally just created $100,000 in additional equity in that asset by spending $50 and hiring some guy to paint some stalls. So just simple things like that can drive just amazing value. So it's exciting to hear some of those strategies that you guys are using. So, well, if we can, we're already at 30 minutes here, and I like to limit these just to be respectful of everybody's time. But I'd love to get your take on the market, where we're at, where we're going. Where do you see multifamily investing trending over the next 12 to 18 months?
Sure. So I believe that, I don't know, like I said, I don't have a crystal ball, but being that the rates have been, increasing, not decreasing the last few months, we're still kind of in the thick of the peak, I would say. I feel like, unfortunately, there's going to be opportunities with people that are not able to refinance, or their loans are coming due. Yep. Where there's going to be a lot of people that are just going to try to exit at their loan amount. And I feel like there's going to be a tremendous amount of opportunity in the distress space for people that are struggling, maybe paying their vendors, or maybe keeping their occupancy up, and are maybe struggling at the 60 to 70 or 80% occupancy mark, and are just not able to refinance. I feel like there may be opportunities for other multifamily groups to come in and take those on and be well capitalized, get better fixed financing versus maybe a floating rate, and really ride the storm. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of opportunities in that sense.
Okay.
Like they were saying by COVID, in terms of the multifamily space, people still need a place to live. So that aspect, even though we're hearing a lot about Phoenix and Austin and certain markets where the rent growth has cooled, in reality, the rent growth was 10, 15, 20%, and now it's maybe only 3 or 4%. So it's leveled off, right, where it's not, rents are not going down, and at least in my opinion, rents are not going down from what they were a year ago. It's just that you're not having as explosive growth. So unfortunately, the operators that maybe came in and said, oh, we're going to have 20% rent growth year over year, those are the ones that were way too aggressive from the get-go. And because of that, unfortunately, they're paying for it, where their deals are not performing and they're not able to rent it at that number. And like we discussed before, Randy, those rent numbers are your key to the deal. If you can't hit those rent numbers, again, it could fluctuate up and down. But if you can't hit those rent numbers on a consistent basis, your deal is going to look very different than what you underwrote it. So it's very important, as like we discussed before, for passive investors to really see where the assumptions are, like we discussed. So I think right now it's very important to be more conservative in that sense. Okay. Rent growth, definitely has to be at a conservative number. But I still feel that there's opportunities. You come in and you renovate. People still want a nice place to live, not only a place, but they want a nicer place. You put in a nicer amenities. You paint exteriors. You put in nicer appliances. Maybe you put in a backsplash. You put in new flooring. You do things to make it a nicer place to live, nicer lighting, a safer place. People are going to want to pay for that. They may not be able to afford as much as what they were being able to afford, pre this era, when maybe the government was printing money.
Yeah.
But they definitely there's still an opportunity to come in and maybe in a more conservative fashion. Feel there's still a lot of opportunities to find opportunities at a lower basis where pricing has come down significantly.
Yep.
Being able to get through your model and your business plan in the next 2 to 3 years, and then refinance or sell when things do stabilize.
I love it. And clearly you guys have bought 9 to 10 deals in the last year to 18 months or so. So you guys think now is a good opportunity and you're continuing to buy. So that really tells me all I need to know about what you guys think where the opportunity is. So, well, very good. Well, thank you for that. And it seems to fall in line with what I'm hearing from most operators and a lot of the folks in the space, those folks that got out there with floating rate debt that didn't have rate caps or had 1 or 2 year rate caps could be in a lot of trouble right now, which is just going to create opportunity for folks like you and for the folks like I partner with as well. So if we can, let's jump right into the last portion of the podcast where I do have a handful of questions I'd like to ask everybody. So I would love to get your input on one educational resource that you would suggest for a new or newer passive investor to help them along in their journey.
Sure. I would say it's not books because there's plenty of books out there as well. Definitely a lot of podcasts. There's, beginner podcasts like Bigger Podcasts, and then there's other podcasts like Gentle Art of Crushing It and other podcasts. I had to plug that. And other podcasts as well. There's a lot of resources for all types. If you're in self-storage and multifamily, commercial, single family, mobile home parks, there's for each sector, Airbnb, every sector has its own slew of podcasts. I would highly recommend, especially if you have a commute, you have time, you're traveling, you're in a car, you're on a plane, use the time wisely, really crush it by listening to it and learning and really growing and taking that education to the next level.
Awesome. Great advice. Curious, on a personal note, any recent bucket list items you've checked off your list or one you're hoping to in the near future?
So I actually recently went with my wife to Utah. It was the first time there.
Okay.
Been to Colorado, been to some other states. We love the outdoors. It was kind of a last minute trip. I would highly recommend it. I know a lot of people, my skier friends were kind of, couldn't handle seeing pictures of the Utah mountains without any snow. For me, I thought it was beautiful.
Oh, it's beautiful.
That was definitely something that was on my bucket list for a while. I'm happy I took that off, and I'm always looking for my next adventure. But I do it when it's when the occasion arises. But that was a recent bucket list item for sure.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm a big fan of Utah. Skiing there, living there, visiting there, summer, winter, spring, fall, whenever. It's a beautiful place to visit. So.
Perfect.
All right, and then the final question I'd like to ask everybody is: if you had an extra $100,000 show up in your checking account today, where would you place that capital as an investment?
In my house. No, as an investor, I really like the multifamily space. Obviously, I'm biased. I've been in the multifamily space. I think stabilized value add, if you have an opportunity where there may be a loan assumption where they're coming in at a very low basis, or they're getting good financing at a long, maybe a 5 to 7 year term that has, positive leverage and good cash flow. That's something that I would love to put my money in, especially with with all the cost segregation and tax benefits that you have instead of, maybe leaving it at a bank. I do want to say one thing, Randy, that a lot of investors may be at the fence now. If I could put my money in and have $100,000, so I leave it in the bank and get maybe 5%, which a lot of banks are offering, a lot of mutual funds are offering, or should I try to get maybe 6 or 7 or 8%, which is similar. Some people may feel that leaving it in the bank is more secure, but you're not going to have those tax benefits. If you have, income that you're looking to offset with cost segregation, you're not going to have that with leaving it in the bank. You'll have that steady Eddie, maybe 5% for the next 6 to 12 months. And that's also only while the market is where it's at. Once inflation does cool off, those rates are going to come back down to 2-3%. And then you're kind of left with a mediocre investment. So definitely still advise, looking at deals, obviously being conservative, knowing and trusting the operator, but definitely in the multifamily space where I would put that money.
I love it. Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that before. As a lot of folks are leveraging these high yield savings accounts now. And if you're in the 25, 30, 35% tax brackets, when you factor in state and federal, essentially take a third of that 5% off. And all of a sudden, that's nowhere near keeping up with where inflation is today. So you're losing purchasing power by leveraging a high yield savings account. So great point, Daniel. Thank you. All right. Well, final piece, just anything else you'd care to share, and certainly where can listeners find you if they wanted to connect with you and learn more?
Sure. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So they can reach out with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. One thing I do want to say, Randy, the reason why I did pursue this podcast of The Gentle Art of Crushing It, besides that I've listened to several podcasts and loved it, I do put out a few times a week on my WhatsApp status, once in a while on my LinkedIn. I'll put out a little blurb, a minute or two of inspiration. I have something in my house that says, "You got this," and then something about crush it. I end pretty much all my 1 or 2 minute blurbs with "Go crush it" as an inspiration, and people see me, they're like, "Go crush it." Sometimes they're being cynical. Most of the time they like it. So when I saw this Gentle Art of Crushing It, I said I definitely want to be on this podcast. But you could definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm available. I'm happy to help others. I've come a long way with my connections and network via LinkedIn. So I'm definitely happy to help and reach out and see how I could provide value.
Awesome. Well, Daniel, thank you so much. You were not kidding when you said you had the energy of a New Yorker. I appreciate that. I am a high D as well. So it's been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Okay, Randy, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And to our listeners, as always, we want to encourage you to continue your education journey with passive investing. But more important than that, make a decision to invest in your first or your next passive investment deal. We're convinced that once you do, you'll be so happy that you did and just wish that you had started sooner. So again, thank you for joining. Join us again next Thursday for another great episode, and have just an amazing day. And just let's all go out there and crush it, I guess we should say, right?
Oh, yeah. Go crush it.
All right. Thank you.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of The Gentle Art of Crushing It. It was an amazing episode. We know we sure learned a lot, and we hope you did as well. We want to take a second and thank you so much for viewing or listening to this episode. And please just know that we only ask for one favor, and that is to make this life magnificent. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.